Welcome to the Hearts Entwined Podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the Hearts Entwined Podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today I've got a lovely guest with me. Her name is Kelly Brändli. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, Lyn. Nice to talk to you.
Now, what is your specific job title that you like to have related to what you do?
I call myself a dating and relationship coach, as well as an executive matchmaker.
Excellent. So very, very relevant to all the subjects that we cover are here on the love, dating and relationship subjects.
Sounds great. Definitely one of my favorite areas to talk about.
Excellent. Well, this is the first time I've actually met Kelly, so I'm very excited to discover and unravel all her secrets and bits of wisdom for the audience to gain their great insights from. So, Kelly, your specific hot topic at the moment, I believe, is dating after divorce.
Definitely. Yeah, that's something I like to talk about, an area of expertise from studies as well as my own personal experience. So I hope to share some really good insights and key points for your listeners today.
Brilliant. Well, perhaps a good starting point would be then to actually talk about your personal experience around dating after divorce, because I think a lot of listeners will be able to relate to that and learn something from your own journey.
Yeah, definitely. So I was married for 10 years and my marriage ended almost 7 years ago now. So I, after going through the recovery phase after the separation, went into my first sort of longer term relationship. I had a 4-year relationship actually after my marriage ended. And I went into that one after very little dating, so to speak. You know, fell in love quite quickly and it was quite passionate. But over the years, realized that I hadn't really gone through the selection and vetting process, perhaps in the way I wished I'd had. And that relationship ended up ending. And after that relationship ended, I went into a very focused period of about 2 years looking for the right partner, where I went on 92 first dates.
Crikey. Wow.
I have a lot of experience to share in terms of the dating process, especially first dates and the beginning phase of what became several mini relationships before finding a long-term relationship again.
So out of those first dates, would you have a rough idea of how many progressed on to second or third dates?
Probably in terms of second and third dates, I maybe saw, let's say, a dozen of the men multiple times. I had 5 of them turned into, as I said, mini relationships. So I dated them for longer periods of time. We went 5, 6, 8 dates before I decided that it wasn't going to be, or the man decided it wasn't going to be the right one.
Excellent. So would you actually recommend that that's a good strategy to sort of date quite a lot of different men one after the other and sort of have a select few that you have a second or a third date on the back of that? Or what would be your advice around what leads to you actually being better prepared to select the right partner?
Yeah, definitely. I would put a caveat first by saying I wouldn't recommend to any of my clients that they go on that many first dates. Part of that was for me transitioning into the dating and relationship space. I was meeting a lot of different people and learning a lot about, what goes on in the dating market and with singles. So there was a personal element to it, but there was also this really high level of interest I had that continued to motivate me to go on, multiple dates. What I did learn out of the process, though, is exactly what I've now realized is the selection process is how to very quickly start to learn about another person and to start vetting them in terms of their core values, which I believe is the foundation of a successful long-term relationship, is finding somebody that shares your core values. And so what I recommend to my clients when they start dating again is to be very clear on their core values and then to date somebody multiple times to find out, is there an alignment of core values? One of the things that I see a lot with the people that I work with who are starting to date again after divorce is you can get very caught up very quickly in the whole passion and the chemistry or the spark of meeting somebody new who seems very interesting. Perhaps they've got a lot of personal characteristics that are different from your ex. And that can be quite intriguing. You can get, really caught up in the whole lust
yes.
and this romantic love phase. And you forget that actually the dating process is about going through the selection and the vetting process.
Absolutely. So when you talk about core values, I mean, some people might think, well, what are values? What are core values? And so, just for the lay person that might not understand what you mean by that, can you give us an example or some examples of what some of your clients might actually list as their core values?
Yeah, so your core values are really your deeply held beliefs about how you see the world and what you expect. So if we think about something, marriage could be a core value that you still hold after divorce. And you might be very keen on finding another partner for marriage again. Or you may hold the belief that marriage is no longer a value you hold, and you're looking for somebody who shares that belief that you can be in a committed relationship without marriage. And it's really about understanding these different beliefs that you hold. And then when you're meeting somebody new, trying to figure out, does this person share these similar beliefs with me? Do they want, if you have children, do they want to have a patchwork family? It can be things related to finances and money. How do they see us? Do they want to be in a partnership where we keep everything separate and we have separate bank accounts and we, transfer money back and forth? Or do they value combining assets again and really investing in the future together?
Excellent. There are some great examples there of things for people to absolutely consider as to what's important to them.
Definitely.
So do you have any case studies you can share with us around the experiences some of your clients have had with dating after divorce and the way you advise them around this subject?
First, I'd like to say there's sort of two different types of clients that I work with. There's the client who's divorced but never had children. And then there's the client who will have had children and a family. And those types of relationships tend to be more complex because they've got things like ex-spouses will still be involved in their life, co-parenting, visitation, all those kinds of things. So maybe as an example, because that tends to be sort of the more typical type of client that I work with, is to give an example there.
Yes.
Of some of the things that they generally go through. So clients will typically come to me in the very beginning. It might be several years after their divorce, they haven't been dating, and they start to realize as the children are getting older, they're thinking, what does my future look like? I'd like to get back out there. I'd like to meet somebody. But they have no idea where to start. So the first thing that we generally will work on is, okay, how do you start meeting people again? And usually online dating is a topic, especially for people around middle age, where they say, I've never done that before. I don't know if I want to do that. And so some of the work is just getting comfortable with different tools for meeting people, including online dating, which I think is a fantastic way to meet people when you're a single parent with limited time and you don't want to be spending, your free time in bars or other places. So getting to really understand how to navigate the online dating platforms and how to vet potential partners even before you've had a first date is a very important aspect of getting back out there and dating. then, once you've met somebody, going through the first dates and stuff, is the question always comes up, when do you introduce the children? I think if you look online, people will have all kinds of different opinions about this. And some will say, oh, you should wait at least a year. Other people will say, introduce them right away. What I've seen from experience with clients and my own personal experience is I tend to say, first go through the initial vetting process of understanding if a potential partner meets your core values and you could imagine this person being a longer term partner for you. In terms of timeline, this might be perhaps say 6, 8, 10 dates, something like that, before you can really say, yes, we share similar values. And then I usually recommend that they introduce the children, but in a very non-threatening, sort of relational way. It may be that the potential partner will come by and pick you up for the date, and they might meet the child for a few minutes, that they get to see each other face to face, and then you leave and go off on the date. And in the beginning phase of dating, I recommend that you don't start with this sort of patchwork family feeling where you're having dates where the children are involved. I think that's way too early to be doing that.
Yes.
I think it's, especially when you have sort of older children, if they're 8, 10, 12, they want to know if you're meeting somebody, they want to know what's happening, but they don't necessarily want to be directly involved unless they know that this is going to be something that continues. And so we will talk about, when is the right time to introduce the children. And I usually use the phases of a relationship as kind of a benchmark. So the way I see relationships is you'll meet somebody and you'll have this romantic phase with the honeymoon, right? Where everything is wonderful and you think you've met your soulmate. And then what will happen is sort of the reality of day-to-day will set in. And dating after divorce with children, this tends to happen sooner rather than later because you have a lot of responsibilities. So people will say the honeymoon phase can last for up to 2 years. I tend to see the honeymoon phase will be closer to the 6-9 months when you're dating with children, around that phase. And then what tends to happen is you'll go through a crisis point with this person. You'll start to see the true parts, the things that you didn't see when you were in the honeymoon phase, the points that you don't like, the characteristics. And what will tend to happen is you'll have sort of a relationship crisis where you'll get to this point and you'll start to say, is this really the person I thought I was dating? And then it can go either one of two ways. Either you decide, yes, I can accept this person for all that they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Or you decide, no, I can't. And the relationship then dissolves and you separate. And I say to clients, once they've got to this point where they say, actually, I accept this person for who they are, and I'm ready to work through this phase with them and to learn the skills we need to build a solid, secure relationship, the conflict management, etc. Once you've both decided that point is what you both want and you're working through it and you're seeing that you're able to solve problems together, that's a good point that I say then to start involving the children into spending more time together.
Yeah, that's excellent advice there. So if we rewind back to, the very early first stages of this process, you said before you even start dating, what does that look like? What's the advice around vetting before you even start?
Yeah, so if you're dating online, or even if you've met somebody, perhaps it could be at the gas station or the supermarket. You can meet somebody anywhere. Is to have clear for you what are and I usually say you can have 5 must-haves and 2 deal breakers. I think that's, 7 things to keep in your mind is probably the maximum that you want to keep. But to say, okay, what are the things that I really must have in a potential mate? And to start asking those questions. And it can be coming back to, if I have my own children, I want to be with a partner who perhaps also has children. So somehow you're going to want to ask those questions, and you can either do that over the telephone Or, if you're meeting online, you might see in their profile they have children, or you can ask a question and just sort of say, okay, for that one, I know before I meet this person that they're meeting one of these key criteria for me. And then deal breakers. I think that's an easy one, to also weed out people before you meet them. And classic one that I hear a lot is in relation to smoking. Somebody either is a smoker and wants to date somebody who either is accepting of smoking or is a smoker, or they don't want to date a smoker. And, I'll hear people go on dates and they'll come back and say, oh, this person's fantastic, but they smoke. And now I'm in a sort of a dilemma. What do I do? And I say, if that's your deal breaker, clarify that up front and don't go on dates with people then who are meeting a deal breaker for you, because you know that eventually you're going to have to make a decision and you've already decided that that's not something you're willing to accept in a partner.
Yeah, there is something around that, Kelly, that I like to challenge people on, because for me, my experience when I met my spouse 10 years ago, and I've spoke about this before on previous episodes, one of my deal breakers, or so I thought, would be that I wouldn't want to, because I was very health conscious, go out with a smoker or a drinker. And as it turned out, my spouse wasn't a smoker, but he was a drinker, and a very heavy binge drinker at that. But what actually happened was, I made it clear, in our conversation that, I didn't want to have couldn't see a long-term relationship with a man who was a drinker. I didn't make it about him. I didn't say he had to quit. I made it all about me and what I wanted, and expressed my wants and needs. And he made that decision for himself to quit. And he's been dry for the last 10 years we've been together.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, I think actually what you're saying is exactly the same. You gave him the opportunity when you first met him, but it was still a very clear point for you that was a deal breaker. And I think had you not had that response from him, then you would have had to make a decision. I think
what I'm saying is I didn't sort of exclude him straight away, and he didn't even sort of make that commitment straight away either to quit the drinking. We just, we could see there was a massive spark between us, like that, like you said, that honeymoon phase where everything was going really well. And I just consistently said, I really want, because it's very important for me to live a long, healthy life. And I want that to be shared with a man who also wants that. But I didn't make it about him. I made it all about my wants. And by, repeatedly conveying that and him seeing that, this is very important to me, he made that decision. But it wasn't straight away, but it was literally within the first few weeks of our relationship. And had I sort of pre-excluded him prior to us actually meeting, we wouldn't have had the lovely lasting relationship we've had. So I'm just saying that even sometimes your deal breakers, you might want to show some flexibility around and just learn how to communicate your wants in a way that he'll either take action around that or not. And then you can decide, if there isn't any action around that, whether you want to continue in that relationship or not.
Yeah, well, I think, you've had a great experience, and absolutely, I think, I take your point definitely to heart and say, that there is certainly the potential there, even when you say it is a deal breaker, that it could turn out differently. So, definitely for listeners, I think that is great advice.
Yeah, I just feel that enter any sort of potential relationship with an open mind, even when it comes to your deal breakers. And as long as you're clear in the way you communicate it and don't make it sound like it's a criticism of what he's doing and make it about you, there are ways to communicate your wants, and men, being the lovely creatures that they are, just want to make us happy. And if they're really into you, they will make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, but you're right. The point is that they need to make that decision. And I think a lot of people could potentially go into relationships with the hope that they will make that decision. And I've seen a lot of clients invest a lot of time, months and potentially years, in relationships holding on to the hope that something will change. And so maybe there's a point there about saying, okay, how do you know that the person you're meeting who's making a commitment like that to you is serious about their commitment versus they're just saying that at this point and it will change further down the line?
I feel it's the way you communicate that. If I'd have gone in there, in that conversation and said, I really want you to quit the drinking, and made it a you conversation, pointing that finger of criticism, he'd hear that as criticism and resist, as men do, wanting to change. But the way you present any sort of situation that's a potential deal breaker is to make it about yourself. This is what I want. So he can make that decision for himself as to whether he's going to fulfill that need that you're expressing or not, that desire that you're expressing or not. And I feel if you go into this situation hoping, you've probably been and have not changed, it's probably been the way you've communicated.
No, super advice. Thank you for sharing that with us.
There are ways and words that you can use to communicate your wants without it sounding to his ears like a criticism or a complaint. And that's a great education right there.
I think exactly, for a lot of people coming out of divorce and long-term relationships, criticism can tend to be something that has plagued a past relationship. And that is something, when you start dating again, is being aware of how you're communicating your needs to somebody else. And like you said, when you come across in a way that's perceived as a criticism, that can be also damaging to a budding relationship, whether in relationship to a deal breaker or not. And those are important skills to definitely develop when you start dating again.
Definitely. I talk about it being around the 3 C's as regards the way women communicate to men. Men receive it as being controlling if you are perceived as criticizing, complaining or comparing, and they're the 3 C's that I use, and they're receiving it as a criticism, complaint or comparison. They'll feel and energetically pick it up as a controlling behavior from a woman, and they'll find that very unattractive and they'll resist that.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And in the early dating stages, it can be things I get feedback from men quite often about things, if they are late for a date or something and they maybe text instead of calling or whatever the situation may be, that they felt very criticized by a woman who they haven't even met yet. And I think that's definitely not the right kind of foundation to meet somebody new. So even if something may not be to your liking initially, I think it's about resisting the temptation to put it out there and to communicate it in a very open way and to show your standards and what you value, but without making it about the other person.
Yeah. And it's just thinking before you open your mouth, really, am I using the you word? In other words, you need to do this, or you should be doing this. It's not going to be received well.
No, absolutely not.
Make it more about what you want and use the I word. Is the way I explain it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And it's a foundational skill that I think everybody needs to have and to reflect on when they're starting this process about how they're showing up and how they're managing both what they need out of a relationship, but also what the other person needs. And as I said, dating after divorce is quite complex because there's so many factors that influence the process that you might not have had to deal with when you were younger and single, or you didn't have children, or whatever that may be. And a lot of people getting back into the dating scene tend to forget that it is different. They're different people. Their lives are different than, maybe they got married in their late 20s and they had a different life phase then. And so it's important to be conscious of where you're at currently in your life.
Definitely. Because there's different roles and responsibilities you take on once you become a parent, for example, to what you had when you were single.
Yes, absolutely.
You've got now the mom hat or the dad hat on, and rather than, being able to drop everything and do what you want when you want, more when you were single without that responsibility of having to consider the needs of any children involved.
Mm-hmm. That's another point that tends to be a question of people how to navigate is the prioritization between a romantic relationship, a new partnership, and your children. And especially if you've been single for a number of years and you've put your children as your number one priority and all your time was dedicated to them, and then you start to date. And a lot of people are insecure about, okay, how do I now carve out time to date? What's the prioritization? Where do I put my partner? In the sort of hierarchy of priorities in my life, and they're struggling to figure out, what's the right way to do that. And you'll see a lot of people who will enter the dating scene, and even on their online dating profiles, they'll write things like, "My children are and will always be the number one priority in my life." And definitely as a parent, I'm a parent myself, I know the feeling of wanting to put your children absolutely at the top. And it's coming from a very loving and caring place. But we also have to look at, okay, how does that then come across to a new partner when you're trying to build something together and they're constantly feeling, okay, I will always be a lower priority in your life, whatever that is. It could be children, then comes career, whatever. And one of the things to do when you start dating is to start looking at your priorities and to make the decision for yourself, okay, what is at the top of my priority list? And how do I manage my own needs to create a relationship with the needs of my children and their life and commitments that we have as a family, as well as carving out the time to develop a connection with somebody new and having private time for that.
So how would you recommend people, if your children are obviously definitely and have been a very high priority for you in your life before you start dating again after divorce, how would you suggest they write about that in a profile?
Well, I like to advise them not to put the children will always be my number one priority. I recommend showing out there that you do have children. I think that's important.
Yes.
That you don't hide that and you disclose that up front. But I think that puts already a potential partner already sort of on the defensive. So one of the things that I do when I work with clients is really to spend time going through their priorities so that they are very clear at what level a relationship is for them currently at this point in their life and what type of relationship they're looking for at this point. Are they looking to find another life partner? Are they looking to casually date? Are they looking for someone to have fun with every second weekend when they don't have the children? And these are all very valid goals for a relationship, depending on where they're at. But they need to be clear when they're going out there and looking for that. And if they are looking for, say, another long-term partner, a life partner, how do they then create time in their personal life and their family life to create a priority for that space? And it could be things about looking at solutions. Maybe it's getting a weekly babysitter so that, Tuesday night can be a date night for you. It could be about making arrangements with other parents so the children can be brought to their sporting activity on a weekend. There's all kinds of brainstorming that we'll do for each individual situation to find out, okay, if it's at the top of my priority list, how do I carve out that time and how do I make sure that I can respect that time to be able to give to a potential partner?
Excellent. That's all fantastic advice, Kelly. And on that note, what I'd really love to do is have you share, one or two contact informations for our listeners to be able to get in touch with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think the easiest way to get in touch with me is via my website. So it's kellybrandli.com. And my name is spelt Brandli.
Yeah, let me just reiterate that again. Kelly with a Y, but then the surname is Brandli.
That's correct. They can find all my other contact details there or directly through the website. Get in touch.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing your wise words of wisdom around dating after divorce. I'm sure there's some great insights that our listeners have picked up from our conversation. And as always, I'll make sure that Kelly's bio and other contact information is in our show notes for our listeners to contact her directly through other means and avenues. And it just leaves me to say, Kelly, thank you again so much. I'm so grateful to have had you on the show.
Thanks so much, Lyn. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that your listeners as well could get some insights there to help them with their new start in dating after divorce.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. And to our listeners for your generosity in giving up your time to listen to our episodes. Value that and thank you for that so much. And so it's left for me to end, as I always do, with true love starts with opening our hearts. Until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.